I had my first out-of-body experience when I was 8 years old. I remember having a vivid dream right in my bedroom, then suddenly waking up midway through and seeing my body from above. As I floated in the dark room, not knowing what was happening, I screamed and kept screaming until I could hear my own crying, which forced me to wake up. This continued to happen repeatedly, more and more frequently, until my parents went from comforting me every night to being worried and sometimes exasperated. I had to take medication for what they considered nightmares and gradually stopped it by the time I was 6. My OOB experiences returned, but by then I was older and not as scared. It wasn't long before I started learning to control it. I could float around my bedroom, and it was more exciting than any normal dream, and sometimes even more so than the lucid dreams I was already familiar with. Soon, I began to expand my territory. I couldn't touch or interact with anything while out of body, so my nightly fun in the bedroom had its limits. Gliding over toy chests and peering inside stuffed animals was only so exciting, so I practiced this strange ability to expand my range. After a month of effort, I could explore the rest of the house. I could watch late-night TV with my parents without them ever knowing, even though I couldn't choose the channel. The nights my parents watched HBO or an R-rated movie were the best. Sound was always muffled in the out-of-body state, voices sounding garbled like speaking underwater. Fortunately, my mother was hard of hearing, so she always had subtitles on when watching TV, which helped me understand everything during my late-night wanderings. Thanks to this, by the time I was 8, I was reading at a high school student's level. At first, I thought everyone had my ability, that it was part of being human. But after talking about flying around the house at breakfast a few times and only being told by my parents that it sounded like a fun dream, I realized I truly had a special ability. Occasionally, I'd use it to observe my father as he wrote late-night stories on his computer in his study. I always found it amusing when he got frustrated because a program wasn't working or when he couldn't figure out how to solve a problem. He also had some pretty interesting late-night recipes. My father was always a great dad. For example, when I was 7, in the summer of '96, he took me to see the movie Independence Day *. In retrospect, I was probably too young to see the alien destruction and violence, but there was always one scene in the movie that captivated me, making me look forward to it every time it aired on TV or through our old VHS tape. With the title of this story, you've probably guessed the direction the narrative is taking. It was the scenes of Area 51 in the movie that impressed me the most. I was drawn to the filmmaker's design and idea of what that secret military base might look like. In fact, as a child, I actually thought they had filmed those scenes at the real location, as if they had privileged access to a massive underground facility dedicated to aliens. Then I thought, perhaps they knew what the place looked like and recreated it. It wasn't until I was 10 that I understood they had completely fabricated that perception, which both disappointed and intrigued me. I was determined to know what was really down there, how it worked, what experiments might be underway, and who worked there. And, of course, whether they hid aliens or their technology in some secret desert warehouse was something I couldn't stop thinking about. By the age of 10, when my family got the internet, I began exploring popular theories about Area 51, jumping from one GeoCities page to another Angel Fire site, devouring every doctored image of alien corpses and UFO autopsies I could find. Games like Half-Life with its Black Mesa complex, or How Perfect Dark depicted Area 51, and even arcade shooters on the theme, all somewhat scratched the itch, but I always knew exactly what I wanted to do with my special ability. I would cheat the system, bypass every layer of security without anyone knowing, no need to join the military for a chance to see the place. Could you blame me? If you could do what I could, wouldn't you try? I wasn't even that far away. I grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona, Las Vegas was just a day trip, and the ranch wasn't too far from Area 51. The legendary producer of American lore was always just beyond the horizon throughout my childhood. Someday, I would see it. The problem was, I'd have to practice every night if I could. The range of my out-of-body ability was limited, and I had to train myself to expand it. It wasn't like I could find a mentor or look up OOB tips and tricks on the internet. In high school, I learned that some Native American tribes sent their adolescents on vision quests. a spiritual journey involving fasting and prayer, sometimes said to induce out-of-body sensations. In other parts of the world, certain drugs could cause OOBEs, but none of these were options for me, whether to learn or enhance my natural ability. I avoided medication entirely. They only hindered my skill. Even taking an Advil before bed made out-of-body travel hazy and weak. The only way for me to improve was through rigorous physical practice. I napped whenever I could, meditated frequently, and taught myself how to lucid dream every night, anything that helped me master my inner self. By the age of 14, I sometimes slept up to 12 hours a day, excessive even for a teenager. Over time, the boundaries grew. The dark regions of the out-of-body realm that I couldn't pass expanded beyond my neighborhood, becoming a playground. I would go to bed early whenever possible to have time to float around and observe the secret lives of my neighbors before they all went to sleep. You could call me a peeping Tom. I wouldn't blame you, but I won't reveal what I saw or name anyone. My curiosity and its rewards were my own. I can only say that humans are strange. When the mask we wear for public fades, and we stop being supporting characters in others' lives, our true nature reveals itself. It turns out every family, every couple, has problems, familiar petty arguments and private conversations. Each of us has peculiar tastes and favorite topics to search online late at night when we think no one else is watching. But I don't judge. If you ever lived in Flagstaff when I was there, I apologize in advance for possibly having watched you at some point. Rest assured, your secrets are safe with me. I enjoyed cheating the laws of the universe and observing without being physically present, but that doesn't mean I started gossiping. Having said that, I admit I wasn't an angel. As a teenager for several years, I sometimes faked sick from high school. I made a few visits to the girls' locker room. Before you scold me, let me say that at the time, I was mainly interested in the range of my out-of-body travel, rather than what I saw in the gym when no one was looking. That wasn't the only exploration I did in high school. Night after night, I'd visit the school, drifting up and down its dark corridors. Have you ever been in a school at night? Those rare times, perhaps when all the lights were on. Few things in this world are stranger than seeing a school in the dark. The shouts and arguments of noisy students were gone, not even a whisper. I often heard sounds when visiting, but they weren't truly audible. They were auditory hallucinations, tricks of the mind, even when disembodied due to the empty space. Don't forget, any sounds I actually heard would be muffled so I could distinguish them. I never saw any ghosts, demons, or supernatural creatures in the out-of-body state, even though I tried. Sometimes I felt like someone sensed my presence or looked directly at me, and in those moments I would usually pause for a bit. But it was always just a coincidence, due to my position when observing them. Their attention was drawn to something on TV, their cat made a noise, or the wind rustled the curtains. I was never detected. I don't think it's possible. I even visited every psychic in town when they connected with a client's deceased loved ones, but it yielded nothing. Either they were all fakes or simply not good at their profession. When I moved to another state for college, I grasped the reality of things better, including the dullness of the place I had always yearned to explore. I accepted that Area 51 was most likely just a secret military facility that housed and test-flew prototype aircraft, hangars full of spy planes and bombers, many of which never went into mass production. Maybe it did hold some government secrets, but I no longer believed it had anything stranger, like aliens and their flying saucers. Life had disillusioned me to the point where I believed the Roswell incident was just a weather balloon. Sorry, childhood hero Fox Mulder, but I no longer cared much for believing. My father passed away during my sophomore year of college. Due to focusing on my studies and having a shorter, more chaotic sleep schedule, I didn't expand my out-of-body range throughout college. And the students in the dorms were too predictable, making surveillance boring. They played games, smoked weed, sometimes did homework, and ignored calls from their parents. But when I returned home for winter break for the funeral and to spend time with my mother, I reverted to my nightly trips. It was my own way of grieving, reliving my childhood, and recalling the joyful times when I explored the town from my bed. And, to be honest, I also hoped to find my father somewhere in the afterlife. A sudden heart attack had taken him from my life, and I thought if anyone had unfinished business and a reason to cling to the living realm, it would be him. But he never appeared. I regretted not telling him my secret then, thinking that if he knew, he might have tried to talk to me as I floated around the house, suspended between the physical world and what awaits us afterward, if anything awaits. In retrospect, there was no logical reason for my regrets. I was simply coping in my own way. However, I had awakened to the concept of death and clearly saw how limited our time can be. So, I promised myself I would fulfill my childhood dream, to see the secret desert place with my own eyes before I died, and perhaps spend the rest of eternity wandering the world. By then, I would have no body to return to, and I wouldn't be able to tell you about the great secrets I might discover. And certainly, if Area 51 turned out to be a disappointment, there were many other places I could explore that most humans never see. I could visit the White House bunker, or get close to the melted radioactive core of Chernobyl's Elephant's Foot. I could dive into an active volcano, peer into the coffin of a famous deceased figure, count money in the vault of a major bank, look inside safe deposit boxes, and find strange things in a personal storage facility. In fact, I did a few of those things, not because that area was particularly interesting to look at. One time, I spent the night in Las Vegas. Going around the casinos and seeing the security rooms and the offices of their owners was one of the highlights of the trip. At the time, I was still trying to figure out how to cheat at games without getting my legs broken in the process. After college, I spent a few more years refining my technique, learning to project my meditative energy further and further. When I first discovered my ability, I was limited to my bedroom. By high school, I could go a few miles. After graduating college, I could travel up to 20 miles. But the farther I went, the more spiritually exhausted I became upon returning to my body, and the time allowed for out-of-body travel also diminished. When exploring, I could move very fast, much faster than when I was trapped in my body. I learned to propel myself through the air to cover long distances. While it wasn't like flying, it was a significant achievement for an amateur with no teacher. Big leaps were necessary to extend the duration of my oobe. I couldn't wake up unless I returned to my body. That was the most frightening aspect of this ability. There were times I felt I barely made it back before a part of me dissipated, and the thought of what might happen if I didn't return before running out of energy always stopped me from risking more. Area 51 would be my toughest challenge, simply because of the distance I had to cover. I had considered the possibility that this secret Air Force base might have some kind of detection equipment that could perceive me. That didn't seem likely, but in a world where there are images of almost everything, the fact that no one seemed to have ever leaked deep inside the place made it mysterious, as if it were separate from reality. Once I returned to my senses, I became obsessed with getting inside, just to see it. I had to see what was inside, if only to satisfy my intense curiosity. Then a meme spurred me to accelerate my plans. In 2019, a group of several hundred people showed up to raid Area 51 out of thousands originally planned to participate. Their goal was to see aliens, and they believed they couldn't be stopped. But of course, it just turned into a party near the base with a few arrests. It wasn't because I worried they would get in and mess things up or cause military personnel to activate some self-destruct measure. I just didn't want them booking up all the nearby hotel rooms. At that point, my range was about 30 miles, and I wasn't sure I could do much better, as that felt like my maximum limit. But if I stayed in Rachel, Nevada, which was roughly that distance north of the base, I could make it. I booked a room in this tiny, isolated desert town's motel for a week, probably one of the longest stays they'd ever seen. And calling it a town was a bit of an exaggeration. It was nothing more than a pit stop in the wilderness. It had no restaurants other than the motel, so most of my meals would come from the gas station's convenience store. I didn't expect to explore the entire base in one night, but I also didn't think it was so large that it couldn't be covered within my time frame. The first night, I went to bed as early as possible at the alien-themed motel, barely able to contain my excitement for the spiritual infiltration ahead. For me, out-of-body travel was most effective in a lucid dream state. I could achieve it at limited distances and durations while meditating, and I had randomly experienced it at night before, feeling as if it were a normal dream where I simply explored my surroundings. But lucid dreaming was the right way to do it, when I could transfer all my unused physical energy to my wandering spirit while my body rested comfortably in bed. But the first night was a real disappointment. I arrived at the base, flying south and propelling myself over B Mountain, where I looked down at the base's lights. I crossed the outer fence with excitement, passing through the desert around the buildings, truly thrilled. I kept thinking I would be surrounded by helicopters and commandos at any moment, but I was there, entering one of the most heavily guarded places in the world. The problem was, I couldn't find a way into the basement. Everyone knows Area 51 has a basement, even if they haven't been there, but the way down wasn't easy to find. I didn't want to waste time just searching for elevators in case something happened, and I lost my only chance to see something truly interesting. So I had to content myself with exploring the hangars and administrative offices. I had done several trial runs at less secret Air Force bases, and on the surface, this airfield was no different from conventional bases. I saw patrolling soldiers, personnel making phone calls, people eating in the cafeteria or working on computers, vending machines, bathroom fixtures, locker rooms connected to gyms, everything one would expect to see. Nothing too surprising. Area 51 isn't even blurred out on Google Maps. Anything truly needing to be hidden from prying eyes wouldn't be visible to any satellite. The hangars I saw only contained standard fighter or reconnaissance aircraft, including a few older models. I even saw one of America's first jet fighters, an F-86 Sabre, still in good condition, the type used in the Korean War. I couldn't explain why they still kept it flight-ready. The only element I couldn't fully explore, besides local server data, was the files stored in cabinets in some offices and officers' rooms. I couldn't see the contents of the tightly packed papers in the cabinets, so physical information was not only protected from potential hackers, but also from the prying eyes of OOB travelers like me. I could wait for someone to open a file and read it as I peeked over their shoulder, but instead, I focused on covering every nook and cranny. To be honest, I'm not an aviation or military enthusiast. I'm sure there are a million people out there who would be thrilled just freely exploring the surface as I did, but it wasn't enough to make all the effort and planning worthwhile. I would try again on the second night, but if I didn't find a way down after 3 attempts, I thought I'd be ready to go home in disappointment. You might think I could just plunge into the ground and keep going until I reached an alien autopsy room or a dark energy reactor. The problem is, passing through solid Earth isn't easy. It's slow, and orientation is impossible because I can't see anything. I don't have much sense of direction or gravity when out of body, so if I got disoriented, I could spin around and end up digging towards the center of the Earth without ever returning to my body. That wasn't something I was willing to try. I was limited by elevators, just like anyone physically sent to the place. On the second night, I finished exploring the surface buildings and focused on finding a way to the deep underground. I realized that such a secret base would have no reason to make elevators easy to find. I scoured every corner, searching for secret rooms, but every building I revisited had no obvious entrance to the most exciting parts. A new idea only occurred to me as I was about to return to my body, as dawn was breaking. I would have to wait another day to try again. Area 51 hangars were originally used as a place to test new aircraft in secret. That was its initial purpose, as a way to keep things hidden from aerial observation. There had to be at least one, or perhaps a few, hangars directly connected to the underground levels so they could manufacture their prototypes underground and bring them up for test flights. What I saw must have been just the tip of a large iceberg. Fortunately, the third night of exploration gave me the breakthrough I hoped for. I entered one of the empty hangars, and although there was no indication of anything below, I lowered myself through the floor. After passing through about 3 feet of metal framework, I found myself in a gigantic elevator shaft with dozens of lights mounted on the walls. The hangar itself was already massive, but this place had a pneumatic lift system that could raise or lower the entire floor of a structure designed to house aircraft. This was the first sign that there was a colossal structure hidden beneath the airfield, and I descended about 50 feet until I hit bottom. In front was a construction bay where a modern stealth aircraft was partially completed. Eventually, if finished, it would be moved onto the elevator and transported to the runway. But for now, the area was mostly empty, no tools or blueprints in sight. The flying wing type aircraft was military gray, and its cockpit was empty, no control systems. Even though I could have spent the night studying it, even if I wasn't particularly passionate about aircraft development, I moved on and began exploring the labyrinthine corridors of an area that very few people had ever had the chance to see. Massive concrete arches supported the natural rock, likely excavated and drilled decades ago. Forklifts and abandoned floodlights were scattered about, and the corridors were dimly lit by a mix of amber-colored incandescent lamps and fluorescent lights. I didn't see anyone in this part of the base. By the end of the night, I realized this first underground level was no more special than the surface, other than being an impressive engineering feat. It seemed to be an area past its prime. It had dozens of empty offices, locked locker rooms, empty vending machines, and only a few uniformed personnel passing by throughout my tour. I drifted through a few more hangars and storage rooms full of old experimental aircraft that had never been publicly revealed and now sat inert under tarps. I also found some kind of conference room, which for some reason had been buried behind a concrete wall. It still had tables and chairs from the 1960s, arranged as if everyone had fled the room in a hurry. The strange thing was that the room was still lit by a faint wall lamp. This conference room was the most interesting thing I saw that night, simply because of its mystery and lack of context. It seemed the first underground level was rarely used. Perhaps it was more bustling during new contracts for experimental aircraft development, and I had simply stumbled upon it during an off-season. But I ultimately spent the entire night wandering through empty rooms and corridors, mostly just looking for a way to go deeper. It was a massive complex that I knew I hadn't fully explored, but I had no desire to continue, as my intuition told me the remaining parts would be similar. However, by the end of the night, I found a bright spot again. Near dawn, I found an area that seemed active, brightly lit with modern rooms, computers, and new furniture. This area was compact, with dozens of men and women on duty. By lip reading, I noticed they were mostly talking about current events. This discovery led me to the central elevator that I had previously missed, one requiring a keycard. I slipped through the door, glided up to the elevator car, and looked at the buttons, seeing that I had 3 more levels to explore. As the sun rose, I flew back up the elevator to see where it was hidden. I emerged in a reinforced concrete bunker-like building. I passed through an empty blast door and moved through a long tunnel on the other side until I was back under the sky at a secondary checkpoint deep within the base. The entrance to the lower levels was hidden in a mountain, and the tunnel leading to it was buried at the end of a narrow valley, far from the other buildings. It was a place that was both hard to see and heavily guarded. I tried to memorize the location, then returned to my body once more, ready to spend another day doing little as I waited to sleep and travel again. I knew that the next visit would be special. When I arrived in Rachel, I had stocked up on some quick meals and rarely left my room, always keeping the curtains drawn. I knew I was intruding in a place I was never meant to see, and the government had gone to great lengths to keep this secret. So naturally, I became paranoid that agents or military personnel might somehow find out and knock on my door. I hadn't felt this scared since I started exploring as a child, when I thought the police would come to arrest me for trespassing. I never considered how they would actually find me, but if anyone in the world had the ability to detect and locate me, it would probably be the people working at Area 51. I just couldn't rationalize how they would do it, because there was so much unknown about what they were researching. For example, if they had ever deciphered alien technology, who knows what principles of physics they might grasp that we never would. When out of body, I projected a part of myself out into the world, something tangible yet hard to detect. I received information and sent it back to my brain for processing. Yet, I had never found anyone who could tell me how I did this, or what kind of signal I might be emitting that someone or something could notice. The fear of being detected always haunted me. What scared me wasn't the consequences, but the idea that there might be a way to capture me in such a vulnerable state. This time, that anxiety manifested as a crazy worry that Area 51 had a trap to lure people like me and imprison our souls for experimentation. I started thinking I might accidentally fall into a room full of trapped souls due to excessive curiosity. It felt like the perfect brain-twisting ending to my story. I never thought I was the first person to truly access out-of-body travel. I always assumed someone had done it before, that there were hundreds, if not more, like me. And if that were true, then surely someone must have visited a mysterious facility in the American desert. And if that were true, then perhaps the facility already had countermeasures in place. Or maybe I was just overthinking. It was a consequence of living a solitary life, those stressful loops in my head sometimes leading to panic attacks. But that had never been a problem when I was out of body. Perhaps that's why I often felt so peaceful when doing it. By the fourth night, all my good food was gone, and the motel TV no longer offered any entertainment. Exploring the base was the only thing I looked forward to, and I wanted to make the most of it as soon as I could. I went straight to the main elevator and descended to the second underground level. This was where the train lines ran. It had long been rumored that Area 51 had an underground rail system, although it was debated whether it served only internal purposes or connected to more distant bases, or hidden entrances, or stations, or cargo terminals. This level was mostly natural caves, drilled long ago by large machinery. Train cars ran on electric tracks, transporting materials and aircraft parts throughout the complex. There were very few rooms, and the cars moved without operators until they reached their destination, where they were unloaded by people who looked like they hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. I wasn't sure if this level was always so busy, or if a major project was underway requiring constant cargo transport, but the underground was certainly bustling with trains moving nonstop. The labyrinthine tunnels were vast, and with no easy signage, I easily got lost. I spent about 2 hours just trying to find something more interesting than the tracks. After accidentally circling back to the elevator, I decided to go further down instead of continuing to waste time searching the local subway system. The third underground level was much smaller than the first and looked entirely different. Its corridors were narrow, cramped, and had more metal than concrete or natural rock. It was reminiscent of the inside of a nuclear submarine, and most of the few people I saw moving around here wore suits and ties. The rest were armed guards. This was quite strange. What were they protecting, or trying to contain, this deep inside? Aliens, I hoped. Seeing a settlement of small gray beings would make this trip entirely worthwhile, and I couldn't wait to describe them to the world, whether anyone believed my story or not. But there was something peculiar and unsettling about this level. Firstly, I couldn't pass through the walls. I could push myself through some metal panels, but something inside blocked me. I also couldn't pass through large blast doors if they were closed. This limited my ability to explore this level. I could catch a glimpse of a room when someone entered or exited, but they always closed the door immediately, as if there was a strict protocol. If I entered any room, I would probably be trapped inside, a risk I couldn't take. The little I saw of the offices and laboratories on this level didn't suggest that aliens were ever kept here, although I didn't expect much anyway. The fact that I couldn't pass through the walls, floors, or ceilings was new to me. Perhaps there was some kind of energy field inside them, perhaps to block something, a type of signal. As a result, they also restricted my movement. Feeling this level was a dangerous place to linger, I returned to the elevator and went down to the fourth, perhaps final level. However, I plunged into darkness and something solid. It seemed I was at the very bottom level, at least the one the elevator served, or they had filled the space below with concrete to seal it, or there was never another underground level, and the button in the elevator was just a fake. I returned to the corridors of the third level to see if I had missed anything. An old wall clock showed it was 3 a.m., so I still had a few hours before my body would start waking up and wondering where its owner was. I thought there might be an entrance to a lower level, if one existed, somewhere else. Going from one corridor to another and walking along each intersection, I got a closer look at the weapons in the hands of each guard when I had the chance. They didn't look like any guns I had ever seen. In fact, they looked like non-lethal weapons with barrels equipped with light panels surrounding some kind of emitter. They had the appearance of laser guns from sci-fi movies, but logic told me they were probably dazzle weapons that could fire blinding lights and powerful lasers or burning microwave energy. This was ridiculous. If someone could get this far, after evading all the live ammunition above, why would the guards at the heart of the base be equipped with these types of weapons? Unless, as I had surmised, they were containing something inside, and this was the only type of weapon that could subdue it. Finally, I noticed something along the corridor sections, connected by joints and rivets. Every few feet, there were thin metal strips and LED lights running along the walls, floor, and ceiling. Initially, I didn't think much of them, assuming they were part of a strange emergency lighting system, until I accidentally triggered one of them. That moment was one of the scariest in my life. I didn't really understand why only one sensor activated after such a long time wandering on the floor. At that moment, I only thought about how anything in this world could detect my presence. The LED strips lit up, flashing red to attract attention, and with my poor hearing, I only heard a blaring siren. Everything was too strange and new to me, so much so that I froze, just floating there, feeling exposed and helpless. Guards rushed over, as if expertly trained, even though this rarely, if ever, happened. They didn't see me, but they scanned their weapons everywhere as if searching, and a few wore wrist-mounted devices that looked like scanners. They were trying to find something invisible, like a ghost. To say this was ridiculous, but as someone who could project their spirit into the world, I never thought the existence of ghosts was too far-fetched. Gradually, the younger guards seemed less tense, and one of the older ones turned off the alarm while the group continued searching. I was still too terrified to concentrate on lip reading, but it was clearly a major event for them. They checked sensors in other corridors to see if any others had activated, and one person passed their scanner right through my position. By reflex, I held my breath, though I had no real breath, and he didn't seem to detect anything. I stood still, observing the entire procedure they carried out. The situation was reported over the radio. The personnel completed their scans and began to disperse, except for one who remained, waiting for a technician to check the sensor. The technician plugged a cable into a port near the sensor and performed some software checks on a small handheld computer. I only started moving when the IT personnel finished checking and left. My procrastination and excessive caution had cost me an hour. I would have to return to my body soon, but before that, I told myself I had to continue, even though I seemed to have been detected. Now, I was wary of the sensors every time I passed, keeping my mental state calm as if to maintain low spiritual energy, and continued down a long corridor leading to a large, promising room. This was the most heavily guarded place I had ever seen. A circular room with only 2 exits, equipped with multiple security cameras and automated weapons. The turrets had the same non-lethal design as those the guards used. In front of me was a massive blast door, divided into sections, painted orange and black, with a faint one on its stainless steel surface. Like other places on this level, I couldn't pass through that barrier, and I desperately wanted to know what was on the other side. It could contain whatever the guards were holding and worried about, but that didn't matter. I wanted to get inside to make this risky, far-reaching journey worthwhile. I had to get in. I waited for a very long time, hoping someone would open it, but I had to return to the surface as soon as I felt my connection to my body begin to weaken. I returned just as my body woke up, still burning with the desire to see the base's biggest secret. Getting past that door became my new obsession. It was like Area 51's own Area 51. The flame of my childhood passion reignited. I would never get answers from anyone in the world, and the chance to peek at documents or computer screens in the base was virtually non-existent. I had seen more than enough of a truly unique place in my life, but my human nature still urged me to explore the ultimate secret. The 5th day was agonizing, not just because of the wait to return beneath the base, but also because the Area 51 raiders started to appear. Only a few hundred actually came to the desert to party, drink, and live out their alien rescue fantasies. But the motel, my sanctuary, was filled with noisy strangers. The sounds of camper engines and motorcycles shattered the peaceful atmosphere. All day, I kept thinking about the door and what lay behind it. Some advanced aircraft, a disassembled alien spaceship, or the skeleton of an ancient god. I would even accept an empty warehouse, as long as I knew for sure and didn't have to live the rest of my life without an answer. I didn't understand what was driving my desires, only that I wanted to see something truly special before going home, and so far, I hadn't felt satisfied enough. After hours of watching TV and browsing the web to kill time, trying to avoid social interaction, I became overly excited when I saw the sunset shining into my room window. By 8 p.m., I was in bed, trying to force myself to sleep. Since I couldn't use sleeping pills, and my new neighbors were rude and noisy, the process was unpleasant. I wouldn't wake up until my sleep cycle was complete, but falling asleep wasn't an easy task, and I spent 2 restless hours. Ultimately, that night was a failure. I didn't explore much of the base, instead spending most of my time just sitting and waiting in front of the large door in the final room, hoping someone would show up and open it. I understood that it was highly likely no one would need to open the door while I was there, but I didn't want to go home thinking I had missed an opportunity just by being there at the wrong time. In retrospect, I wish I had explored more of the base instead of wasting time just standing in one place, hoping for the impossible. I returned to my body in a state of frustration and endured the 6th day. As my time at the motel was running out, I could extend it, but I felt that would only lead to more extensions, like an addiction, and I had to leave that desolate town. My mother called, as did my boss, both wondering when I would return. Responsibilities at home were pressuring me to end my time in Nevada, and my motel room's air conditioner was now working weakly. A repairman wouldn't arrive anytime soon. I felt miserable, but I needed to stay a little longer. I almost slipped into a dream just to escape reality for a moment. I had never been out of body 6 consecutive nights, so I was only truly released from the darkness during rare short naps during the week. And still, no one came to open that damn door. Every time I was about to leave the security room to explore more of the base, I told myself that someone would come and open the door for me, but it didn't happen. I spent a full 10 hours just wandering that underground level, unable to go any further. I even tried sending psychic waves to the people there to manipulate them into opening the door. It didn't work. I woke up early in the morning, drenched in sweat and feeling irritable. I banged on the wall and yelled at the people in the next room, asking them to turn down their music. After they told me to shut up, I left my room, got some water and food, and drove off. Perhaps I could endure the desert and the heat for another day, but not the motel room where I felt like I was losing my mind. Eventually, I drove down to Las Vegas and spent the day on the bustling streets, spending money on tourist shows. This helped me forget everything, calm down, and detox from the secluded lifestyle I had locked myself into. Eating real meals at real restaurants also helped. Still, I never wanted to return to Nevada. When I returned to Rachel at dusk, I felt more relaxed. Instead of going back to my room, I went to the party, or rather, observed from a distance. The drunk people seemed to be having much more fun than I had all week. They gathered outside the gate, playing around while the base guards ensured they didn't go further inside. The crowd was smart enough not to provoke getting shot, though as I said, a few people were arrested. The party lasted into the night, and it was a shame they didn't get to see aliens. But if that didn't disappoint them, I figured I shouldn't disappoint myself either. In fact, I had seen inside the base, something none of them ever had. I had fulfilled my childhood dream. I could have gone home right then, looked back on it all a year later, and still felt thrilled about everything I had witnessed inside Area 51. But that was never enough for me. So instead, I drove to a secluded area near the base, reclined my seat, covered the windows, and fell asleep. If I went out of body this close to the base, everything would be clearer for a better experience, and it would save travel time to and from my body. I was determined to leave the state on a high note. Once out of body, I glided to the main gate area, slipped past the crowd, and then past the guards who were preventing them from going deeper. If they could see me, they would surely cheer, seeing another civilian pass through the base gate. I used to mock them, but as the night wore on, I started seeing those people as a good luck charm. Before reaching the elevator, I saw something new and noteworthy. 2 people in full hazmat suits with dark visors, concealing their faces, emerged from a room inside the mountain tunnel. They were pushing a cart with a large metal container on top. Whether they were connected to the final door or not, I wanted to know what they were doing, so I quietly followed them undetected. They passed all checkpoints without speaking to anyone as others in the corridor moved aside. I gradually realized they were taking the path I had taken to the locked door. I didn't want to get my hopes up too high, but it seemed these 2 would be my chance to get inside. As the 3 of us descended to the underground level together, I tried my best to control my excitement, as that was the only way I could think of to avoid triggering a sensor again. The 2 hazmat-suited figures almost broke my heart when they turned right at the last intersection before the door, but it turned out they were just going into the surveillance room to reprogram their access cards. That room was full of monitors and had a guard stationed inside. There were 4 cameras pointed at the large door. They must have daily changing security codes as an extra layer of protection. Once their cards were updated, we approached the final barrier. They swiped their cards on 2 scanners, pressed down on 2 red buttons with their thumbs, and finally pulled 2 levers on the door. Perhaps this was something they did weekly, or perhaps it was an annual event that I was incredibly lucky to catch. Regardless, the massive metal slab finally began to slide open, revealing darkness within. Red flashing lights illuminated a sloping concrete corridor and a large cargo elevator going down. The hazmat team entered and locked the cart's wheels into a pair of restraints on the elevator, and the elevator only began to move once the massive door closed. I stayed with them. There was no escape now unless they left first. The elevator slowly descended, and I remained with my 2 new companions. Instead of going ahead, I had come this far, so I was willing to be patient a little longer. I was descending deep into the very heart of Area 51, a forbidden place that very few people had ever even thought about, let alone seen with their own eyes. The journey lasted over 10 minutes, and it felt like we were going deep underground. If there was a gate to hell or another dimension, it would be here. When the elevator stopped, a second massive door slowly opened, revealing something both strange and not quite monstrous. Before me was a lobby entirely carved from solid rock, its surfaces perfectly smoothed. About 30 rock rivets were illuminated only by the light from the elevator corridor, leading to a large, perfectly cubic void before a dark abyss. This square block was about 40 feet on each side, certainly a grand entrance to whatever lay beyond. It wasn't without technology or machinery. Sensors along the opening's edge, like those on the 3rd level, and large round holes were set into the rock on either side of the door. I entered the lobby with the hazmat team as they pushed their cargo in and looked around. To the left was a small, old, and damaged metal door. While they opened their container to retrieve its contents, I went over for a closer look at that old side door. It seemed to lead to the original 4th underground level, or what was left of it. The door had no power and no energy field, so I could pass through to see what was on the other side. But I only saw darkness, nothing. On closer inspection, I realized the door was actually jammed open a small crack. From the outside, I saw a bit of a rockfall blocking my view. It seemed the corridor had collapsed at some point, or perhaps the entire level had been purposefully destroyed. Whatever had happened, it seemed completely inaccessible. I returned to the 2 hazmat personnel as they jointly opened the cargo container. It was a large battery or some kind of power source. I understood they were replacing one of the 2 power sources maintaining something inside, behind, or around that massive entrance. But they couldn't just simply replace the battery. It seemed they had to shut down the entire system first. Realizing this, I felt both fear and excitement. I knew I had a real chance to see what they kept so deep inside. The 2 men stood on either side of the opening, opened 2 fuse boxes above the battery compartments, and flipped 2 switches. Nothing happened for a few seconds, then the lights inside the room began to gradually brighten. The first thing I noticed was the sheer number of lights on the ceiling. There was an entire stadium lighting system turned upside down. It was excessive for illuminating a room. One of the hazmat-suited figures began replacing the battery, while the other stood guard right in the center of the entrance, aiming his weapon into the gradually brightening room. I will never be able to explain the place I saw. I don't think I could articulate it even if the base operator sat down and meticulously described it. Deep inside Area 51 was the lobby of a grand hotel, its architecture strongly reminiscent of the 1920s. The more I looked, the more it seemed to have been pulled out of time. This wasn't like a movie set or some replica. The lobby had Roman columns, marble floors, a mahogany reception desk with an old-fashioned black telephone. The hard materials were still in fairly good condition, but the fabric materials, like the red carpet and wall drapes, were tattered and covered in dust. Behind the fabric hanging from the ceiling were ornate wallpaper patterns, decaying, curling, and blending into the floor as if this lobby had been cut out of a building and transported here. The outer edges of the walls looked sharp, with no signs to indicate its origin, but it seemed to have once served wealthy patrons in a major American city a century ago. Now, here it lay, a misplaced hotel lobby. Perhaps something incredibly horrific had once happened within these walls, or it was simply haunted or cursed. Other possibilities I considered upon seeing it included the lobby's physical structure being contaminated, and this base keeping it here to prevent its spread. Or perhaps it had actually been transported from the past, through a time warp in a failed experiment. Mesmerized by the vast room, I entered through the open doorway without thinking. There was a resistance as I stepped in, but I overcame it without much difficulty. There was something about the room that made these people confine, fear, and point their weapons at it, but I figured whatever it was, it couldn't harm me. I just wanted to take a quick look, and then when they finished changing the battery for the lights, I would leave with them. Every small detail of the hotel, from the brass bell on the counter to the yellowed stationery envelopes waiting endlessly for an occupant and probably disintegrating if touched, everything was too real to be part of a replica. It was also in good enough condition to suggest that this place had been moved here a very long time ago and preserved as if in a museum, whether rebuilt brick by brick or somehow brought here in an instant. My untrained eyes couldn't tell. When the lights came on fully, the overhead light also covered and illuminated the lobby, and if I could feel temperature, it would surely be unbearable. I could spend the rest of the night thinking about the purpose, history, and storage cost of this hotel lobby, or simply exploring it, but I didn't want to linger in the deepest part of the prison chamber. I turned to leave, heading towards the colossal exit door, but unfortunately, I almost succeeded. Initially, I didn't realize I was trapped. I hadn't thought anything of one of the hazmat-suited figures inserting the new battery, closing and locking the cover, and pulling a lever to activate power from the battery. In my mind, they were just there to keep the lights on, but it turned out they had activated an invisible membrane in that square doorway. It was the same type of electromagnetic field as in the metal walls above, preventing me from passing through, and my foolish self had just trapped myself in the tomb of the hotel lobby. The two hazmat guards finished packing the discharged battery into its container and pushed it towards the elevator. I screamed at them, but of course, they didn't hear me. I pounded on the barrier with ghostly punches, hoping to create a sound to alert them to my presence, but it was no use. Hope flickered when they turned back and advanced towards the door, but they only did so to turn off the powerful lights. The lights didn't go out immediately. Hundreds of bulbs above still cast a faint glow for a few minutes, just enough to give the lobby the light of a few candles. But I knew I was about to be locked in darkness, perhaps for a week, or worse, for years, while my body would slowly decompose in my car, where it would be incinerated under the sun. That was it. I had brought about my own death, or perhaps I would continue to exist without a body, trapped here for centuries as a formless entity. I thought about all the places I would never see and about my poor mother, wondering what had happened to her son. The only two people who could free me disappeared behind the elevator door, and I was left floating in the center of the hotel lobby, utterly desperate and resigned. The lights slowly faded, warming this space for a few more minutes. I didn't want to think about my fate or how long I could exist in awareness in this place before everything dissolved. I had never failed to return to my body. Perhaps there was a faint hope that I would just wake up and everything would be fine, but I didn't see that as feasible, especially since I was trapped in a chamber designed to contain the very force I exploited for out-of-body travel. The lights dimmed further. I could barely see anything anymore. Colors had left the lobby, only faint dark shapes remained. I knew pure darkness awaited me, and there would never be anything else. A part of me would be stuck here forever. Then a voice spoke. For the first time in my intangible form, I heard a voice directed at me clear. "I see you." The voice boomed, deep and disjointed from endless darkness. "And what kind of being are you?" Finally, I wasn't alone. I dared not move, so terrified that my intangible self felt like it was losing cohesion and disintegrating. If I were in my body, my heart would be pounding, or I would have fallen into a state of overwhelming panic. But in this state, true horror only weakened my ability to exist, debilitating me to the point of almost losing my mind. I had never come so close to experiencing a fear that made me lose my very sense of self until now. The entity that spoke drew closer, whispering in my ear from behind, "I think I've been here long enough. Perhaps you are the way out for me now." Just before darkness completely replaced the light, I felt something pierce straight through where my heart and spine would be. Long, pale fingers twisted and reached towards my eyes. Those fingers were like spider legs, ending in sharp claws. It wasn't a ghost, nor a demon, nor some powerful alien that had been imprisoned here for a long time. It was something entirely different, and I would never know for sure what it was. Its presence ripped apart my connection to my body. It spoke one last sentence, "Now take me with you." I felt a terrible burning pain tear through me. The next thing I remember was suddenly waking up in my motel room, lying on the floor, tightly wrapped in thick blankets, still intact. The clock read 11 a.m., my final checkout time. Somehow I had escaped my prison, returned to my body, and traveled all the way back to the motel. I looked out the window and saw my car parked crookedly, occupying 2 spots and scratched as if I had driven back in a drunken stupor. I packed up and checked out in 10 minutes without even changing clothes. Then I drove straight out of Nevada without stopping. I had expected the police or military to chase me or set up roadblocks, but the road was largely empty all the way to the border. No one knew I had entered that containment chamber or any part of the base. When I got home, I ate a quick meal, turned off all the lights in my apartment, turned off my phone, and slept for about 14 hours. The next morning, I was calm enough to begin processing what I had experienced and write it all down. That long sleep was dreamless, but I didn't pay much attention at the time. Later that day, I started feeling tired earlier, and my brain felt fuzzy, as if it were disconnecting from itself, making already boring work even harder. That condition improved over time, but I lost 2 things permanently as a consequence of my mistakes. It's been years, and I haven't dreamed once. I go to sleep and wake up as if no time has passed, and because of that, I no longer have the ability to go out of body. A part of myself is lost forever. A year ago, I went to the hospital for a brain scan. They didn't find anything strange or help me find a cure, but I know that the parts of my brain related to dreams are more active than average, even though I don't actually dream anymore. I think that whatever I encountered freed itself, but also found a way to return to my body and exchanged its freedom by residing somewhere in my mind. That entity now has 8 hours or more every night to manifest and carry out whatever potential actions it desires. It doesn't communicate with me or show me images of its purpose, but I have no reason to think it means well. The people working in Area 51 tried to contain it and might have known how to detect and suppress it with light and other forms of energy, at least until I came along and accidentally freed it. I survived and do everything to keep others safe, including locking my bedroom door with a key every night so as not to leave the house in a possessed state. But I don't think that thing wants to control my physical body, or perhaps I am just an imperfect vessel, and it is looking for someone else. Perhaps my actions have harmed someone you know, and for that, I am truly sorry. I am about to move to one of the most remote rural areas, but I'm still not sure if I can find a home 30 miles away from others. I will accept a solitary, dreamless life if necessary, but I need time to find the right place. In the meantime, I will live a nomadic life so that no single community has to endure the horror I carry, and I hope that no one detects or suspects anything about me. Perhaps I could stop it all if I ended my life or turned myself in at Area 51, but I apologize, I am still too selfish and cowardly to do so, for my mother and my friends. I cannot be near home. You see, every night, 1 or 2 people within a 30-mile radius of me die from sudden brain hemorrhage. Local news reports it and calls it a possible local epidemic, and that's when I connected the events and realized my mistake. I have been wandering ever since. I have turned myself into a living biological weapon, and my only remaining hope is that if you unfortunately encounter what I carry, any pain or horror you experience will be brief. Once again, I am truly sorry. It is a terrible thing to squander a gift, and even worse to abuse it.